back. The famine! Yes! The famine is over! The famine is over! The curse be damned! Hit the nuclear button! Mayo have won the All-Ireland! Silverware is coming home!
Oh my God! Almighty! Wonderful!
Oh my God!
What a match!
Oh my God!
What a match!
Mayo have done it! Oh Martin, 75 years! How on God's earth can you sum this up?
Yeah.
Oh my God!
That was just, I tell you, I cannot get over this. This is just incredible. Look at, on the 57 years ago, 57 years ago, Neil Armstrong was the first man to land on the moon. And he uttered the immortal phrase, one small step for man, one giant step for mankind. Today, this is a giant step for Mayo football. This is remarkable. A team of heroes, invincibles. This is simply wonderful.
Oh my
Not
God.
alone to win the All-Ireland, to win their fourth ever, but to beat the Kingdom, to beat Kerry in one of the great All-Irelands that was played at pace, that was played with purpose. Oh my good God. And Keith Duggan, if you're living over in the land, I know you're in the land of the comb over, and I know you've written the definitive book, The House of Pain, and it's about the shortcomings and setbacks of Mayo. But now you can add a new chapter in the next edition, and it's Sam is home, found after 75 years.
Listen, just take this in. Take it in. I've never seen anything like it. Go back is a wash with green and red. It's absolutely magic.
Hey, welcome to More Christ. I'm Marcus. Today I'm delighted to be joined once again by my friend Father Conor McDonough. Welcome back to More Christ for the umpteenth time. Father Conor is a Dominican priest from Galway. Over the past number of years, I've had the pleasure of speaking with him several times for the channel. It was also shared a platform together at different events, and every meeting's left me encouraged and challenged in many ways, and deeply moved in some cases. So as part of his ministry, he's currently undertaking a doctorate at the University of Galway. He's researching the letters of St. Paul in early Irish Christianity. Today, we're going to do something slightly different, though. We're going to look at Mayo's recent All-Ireland win, which seems to have gone viral across the world at this stage. We're going to talk about the GAA, its place in Irish life, and its relationship with the church and with the nation. So, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about your own background with the GAA, Father Conor, and I suppose Mayo's All-Ireland win, now that it's so fresh?
Yeah, well, I was thinking a bit when we were preparing this, to whom are we speaking in this episode? And if it's kind of Irish people or people who are familiar with Irish sport, no explanation of Mayo's win will be necessary. And if it's people who are totally unfamiliar with Irish sport, almost no explanation would be sufficient. That it's kind of this epoch-making sporting moment, which is nevertheless intensely local, and involves a sport that's, played by pretty much only Irish people. So for those who are outside of Ireland, it might be hard to understand this, and you'd have to think of your own analogies for your own different contexts wherever you are. But yeah, so Mayo won the All-Ireland Gaelic football championship, 75 years since their last win.
Colby, Mayo holding on to it, 33 seconds. The green and red of Mayo was about to be heard all over the world. This is sensational. This is mind-boggling. This is a point. The All-Ireland football final has ended in this scoreline. They'll talk about it for years. Mayo, 1 goal and 20 points. Kerry, 1 goal and 17. Listen, everybody needs to know that Mayo are the All-Ireland champions.
So Mayo is a county of the 32 counties in Ireland. They all are represented by teams in this sport, Mayo is like particularly football mad as a county, and they have constantly been close to victory, especially in the last few decades. They've been, I think, in something like, I don't know how many finals has it been, 11 finals or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
In recent decades, and they never managed to get it across the line. There's the whole question of the curse, which we'll come back to, which is actually a load of baloney. I mean, it's what leads headlines internationally because it's the kind of the darker side of the story. But I mean, it's complete nonsense. The fact is that they have just constantly lost, constantly failed, but just kept coming back. and then finally this extraordinary breakthrough on Sunday with an extraordinary team where you have some, really experienced players and then some total young guns who are playing for the first time for the senior team. It's extraordinary victory over like a really worthy opponent. And then this outpouring of emotion. I mean, so many people have been saying in the aftermath, they've never seen so many grown men cry.
I saw grown men and women crying. There's a great shot on social media, Darren, of a man. I think it is him that I interviewed on the 1:00 news yesterday. And he was just bawling, crying. He blessed himself. This is captured on camera. He blessed himself, bawled, crying, and then slid into the seat. And the seat in Croke Park went from under him. So he disappeared completely into the ground. And it was funny, but it was emotional.
I know, and, I've goosebumps thinking of it. I saw it. It's just amazing.
I have to admit, I was one of them. I was kind of trying to hide it, but I was definitely one of them. I'm not from Mayo, but in the commentary afterwards, the team often spoke of the Mayo diaspora. And I guess as a Galway man with a father from Mayo, I'm part of the Mayo diaspora. And I grew up going to Mayo matches with Dad and with the family. And especially in the last 2 years, being based in the west of Ireland, I've been going to more Mayo matches. So I have particular emotional investment this year. And so I fully appreciate, well, I'm not sure if I fully appreciate the emotional significance of it, but definitely greatly appreciate the emotional significance of this incredible breakthrough. I play Gaelic football myself growing up, and hurling as well, which is the other major sport of the Gaelic Athletic Association. So there's a big part of my life. I didn't play to any particularly high standard, but it was an important part of my life growing up for sure.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Father Conor. And like that, I played also, but not to a very high standard. I'd say you were higher standard than me.
How about that?
And I'm a bit salty because my dad's from Louth, so Louth, unfortunately, as we know, we're beaten by Mayo in the semi-final. Could have been first final in how long? Good grief. But I was so happy for Mayo. And alongside that, you talked about the national and the international pieces. There does seem to have been this kind of deep resonance of the victory, kind of archetypal, if you will. But I noticed these Christian-coded pieces to the story and to the victory. First, there was that talk about the curse in from the 1950s that you referenced. I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about that and maybe what it says about Irish people and this strange blend of Christian faith and superstition that makes up this nation.
Yeah, so there was the idea, and really it's something that kind of floated mainly in the 1990s. But, you see it reported in the press as if this is something that's been going around, since the 1950s. In fact, it's a kind of an urban legend that emerged in the 1990s, by all accounts. There's a good piece on the RTE website published in the last few days that totally debunks it and goes into every possible angle, including the fact that funerals took place in the morning. Sorry, I should explain the curse. The idea of the curse is that the Mayo football team, while celebrating their win in 1951, passed by a funeral and didn't pay sufficient respect to the funeral, and that either the priest or the widow or a local member of the travelling community cursed the Mayo team and said, "You're not going to win until the last member of this team died," which happened, in fact, a few years ago. Some people were doing the countdown, which is a bit morbid. But anyway, people who've dug into the history of this have shown that there's absolutely no basis for this whatsoever. But it certainly got into the mindset, and even the idea of a priest laying curses on a team. It's, some people would say that's not particularly priestly or Christian behavior. But if you do read the lives of the early Irish saints, there's a surprising amount of maledictory behavior. So kind of saints cursing people who've done wrong and so on. So there's maybe older roots than we might expect for that kind of practice. But in this case, it's not part of the historical reality of the thing at all. But there was, you mentioned kind of Christian coded elements in the thing. And I think so many aspects of this story, they just show the extent to which the Christian faith and Irish culture are just kind of utterly interwoven and kind of inseparable. That when people reach for various different, analogies to express, sporting excellence or whatever it might be, or collective identity, that very often, even in a somewhat post-Christian context, they're reaching for Christian symbols.
No, absolutely. And of course, you and I have spoke about Tom Holland and Dominion in the past and how deeply immersed we are in Christian identity and symbolism and so on. And I understand Bijan Umrani has looked at England specifically and how the church has influenced and infiltrated the consciousness of the people there. And of course, to your point, I think that's very true with Ireland, and you can see it quite profoundly with the GAA. So we'll tease out some of those pieces today. I just want to back up what you're saying about the curse and refer to the fact that there was a similar idea of a curse for County Clare before they won the All Ireland in 1985. The Biddy Early curse. It does seem to be something that pops up whenever there's a significant drought. The imagination takes over.
And the Galway hurlers had a curse associated with them as well. I mean, the Biddy Early one is ridiculous because Biddy Early was long dead by the time hurling was codified. So that definitely wasn't historically accurate. But yeah, it's curious that desire to interpret sporting victories and losses in terms of a kind of a battle between good and evil of some kind. That kind of moral dimension to sport, which is curious.
Excellent, thanks, Conor. And another thing I picked up was on the day, the president of the GAA, of course, from Armagh, Jarlath Burns, he spoke about Mayo people praying to Our Lady of Knock before handing over the cup to Jack Hine, or for hand over for him to speak.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is real. You're not dreaming. It's 2026, and Mayo are All-Ireland champions. Kerry, you have been All-Ireland champions 39 times. You have been wonderful All-Ireland champions last year, and I know that you will be back. You are a young team, and I don't even think you will begrudge this moment to Mayo. But 1936, 1950, 1951, and now 2026, it's Mayo's year. For 75 years, you have prayed to Our Lady of Knock, and today, Our Lady of Knock has answered your prayers.
His speech was wonderful. I suppose, what's he referring to, and maybe what place does Knock have for the people of Mayo, as indeed for many Irish people?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Jarlath Burns, the president of the GAA, his brother actually co-wrote a book, which is on the shelf somewhere there behind me, on how to pray the rosary with one of our Dominican priests up in Newry, Father Patrick Desmond. So there's family involvement in promoting devotion to Our Lady, at least. So yeah, he mentioned praying to Our Lady of Knock, and Knock is a shrine, properly understood, I think, a Marian and Eucharistic shrine, where a vision is commemorated, a vision given to the local villagers of Our Lady and St. John the Evangelist, St. Joseph, and then the Lamb on the throne surrounded by angels. So this kind of apocalyptic vision, this manifestation of what's actually happening at the Mass, for example. And, you know, ever since that apparition, Knock has been a place of pilgrimage, a place of healing, a place of devotion. 2 popes have been there, Mother Teresa, Joe Biden went there, the whole lot. So it's a really, really important place. There's an airport there. So anybody can fly in and visit that shrine. And I'd say it is a very, very important place, especially for the west of Ireland. If you think of when that apparition took place, it was shortly after the famine. The Great Famine was particularly strongly felt in the west of Ireland, particular pain and suffering there in places like Mayo. And so this vision is often interpreted just as a kind of a heavenly sign, recognizing the fidelity of the people through times of great suffering, that there's this kind of glory shown to the people who have persevered through intense suffering. So even there, okay, so people go to Knock and pray for the Mayo team, but the Mayo team's patience and perseverance through 75 years leading to a moment of glory. There's something of the story of Knock kind of woven into that as well. But certainly I know a lot of people who have lit candles for the Mayo football team in Knock itself. And I'd be very interested to see, I mean, we're recording this just kind of a few days after the victory. I'd be very interested to see if Mayo do what a lot of continental soccer teams have done when they've won, which is to bring the cup to a particular sanctuary of Our Lady and to honour her for her intercession. So we'll see if that happens. I'm praying it might.
Excellent, thanks, Connor. And there was also an image that went viral of a gentleman who was crying and blessing himself when he collapsed to the floor in this great scene. And this same Mr. Fitzgerald, I can't remember his
Yeah,
full name, he went up Croagh Patrick, as far as I understand, on the Friday, and he left flowers on the altar of the chapel to be ready for Reek Sunday.
yeah.
I wonder if we may talk a bit more about the Holy Mountain and its importance shortly, but a another piece that I want to speak about before that is the manager, Andy
Mm.
Moran. He spoke about the game after the game about praying to John O'Mahony.
Once that happens, you've played your last card, you're praying. And Joe, I was saying there on the previous interview, my mentor, my friend John O'Mahony, I'd be lying if I didn't have a little word to him at 69 minutes, you know.
Toronto, the
Yeah,
great manager, who I imagine you have a particular graph for what he did with Galway,
sure.
for
For
example.
Galway, 2 All-Ireland wins, 100%.
So in a follow-up then, one interviewer actually asked him if he was being serious, or it's just, oh, that's just
Mm.
like superstition or what have you. But he did say that he really did believe and that he was a masker and so on.
And you're praying and you look up to the skies and you pray to some special people and you say, come on, give us a turnover here and let us get out. You know?
Do you mean that literally? Are you superstitious? Would you think that way? Do you think about, I don't know, people or God or anything?
Yeah, I'd be a religious sort of fella. I'm not overly religious, but like, Joe, I'd be a mass goer. I'd do stuff like that. But I've never been in that situation before, Joe.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I've
Yeah.
never been in the situation where it's 69 minutes and we're ahead, and there's a hooter, and I know the clock is going to go in the next few seconds. But did I look up to the skies? Yes, I had. Said a little prayer to Jono. Joe, just if you're going to help us, today is the day, do you know. But I would have seen like little things like Jono celebrating his team the 25 years yesterday,
Yeah.
and I was 75 years. I was wearing the white jerseys. I was saying there's just something about this now
Gosh.
that it's.
How does the GAA in a predominantly Catholic country deal with some of these matters of life and death, and maybe what virtues might it have in showing us respect for those who've gone on and so on?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So I was really struck by that, his mention of prayer to John O'Mahony, who is not a canonized saint, right? So from a Catholic perspective, we're not necessarily promoting devotion or like intercessory prayer by means of those who are not beatified or canonized. At least you couldn't kind of have a saint's day in honor of Saint John O'Mahony, right? Or Saint Maradona or Saint Lionel Messi or any of those boys. At the same time, there's a kind of a folk Catholicism at work there. I think a lot of people do find it easy to address prayers to the kind of their beloved dead. They find it easier to do that in many cases than to address God directly for whatever reason. So it's not something I'd want to come down on. And interestingly, he mentioned also a man called Aidan, I think Drake is his name. I looked it up afterwards, and he's a kind of a family friend of the Morans who had Down syndrome and who died, I think, maybe last year. And so there are these two people who were kind of in his heart in that moment, and that he turned to and asked his beloved dead to pray for him in that moment, which I thought is kind of a sweet thing to do. And as you say, affirming faith in the kind of the intercession of the saints, let's say, and then afterwards backing it up by saying that he is a mass goer. So what role did the GA play in all of this? It's really hard to know, and I mean it's something we'll come back to maybe a bit deeper in terms of the relationship between the church and the GA generally. I would say the GA, like football matches and hurling matches and so on, it is one place in which generations gone before us are remembered and honoured. And that doesn't happen in a lot of other places. So, for example, you'll often have, if somebody dies, there'll be a minute's silence before the game, and there'll always be this little phrase, Yeshte Grawa Anan Jilish, on the right hand of God, may his faithful soul be. And so there is a kind of a prayer element to it. It's not necessarily that there's an explicitly Christian prayer there, but there is still a certain kind of a piety that's at work there in those sporting moments, which I find it's not necessarily the same thing as Christian prayer or Christian piety, but it kind of moves in that direction. I think those who honor those who've gone before us, at least they're open to honoring something greater than themselves. And I'd say even so that idea of transcendence, of involvement with past generations, any great sporting moment is a moment also of transcendence, where you're part of something bigger than yourself. And And I think that's very often people speak about sport and religion. This is a kind of, football is our religion or something like that. You often hear people say that in Mayo, and whether that's kind of means it's necessarily in conflict with, let's say, Christian religion. And that's potentially the case. We might talk about that later. But it's also possible that it kind of opens people up towards something bigger than themselves. They're part of some, great emotional moment. They're connected to all these people around them. They're connected to people who are unlike them. They're brought out of themselves, out of their concerns, out of their own personal projects into something that is shared and communal. And that's, again, a move in the direction of authentic worship, I'd say.
No, excellent. Thank you, Father Conor. And it also, to back up your point, I think it powerfully speaks to the fact that we are ritual creatures or liturgical beings in distinctly Christian language. You see that in James K. Smith and some of these folks, and Drew Johnson, doctor from the US. They talk about sports, particularly in that frame of liturgical or ritual, that these pieces that you're laying out, just if you take it on a purely rationalist basis, you're like, whoa, this doesn't make any sense.
Totally.
But that's what we give our lives to. That's what we make sacrifices for, and so on.
Yeah.
So, we'll speak more about that, whether it's an idol or an icon
Yeah.
in some cases, maybe in a little while.
Yes.
There was another element of that transcendence, the living and the dead, from Marty Morrissey.
All the jokes about Mayo being losers, delete. All that is over. Who cares about a curse if it never existed? It is now Mayo's day. This hasn't happened in 7 decades and 5. Generations of Mayo people have lived and died and not seen what you are now seeing on your television screens. But you are here, wherever you are in the world right now. You are with us in Croke. This is happening. You are watching one of the most significant moments in the history of the GA since it was founded in 1884.
Congratulations to Mayo, Marty. What a team.
And he had so many great lines, as in
Yeah.
the Midwest radio folks.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, on social media, I shared that with you. This, what was it? Press the nuclear button.
Press the nuclear button. The famine is over. Brilliant.
So Marty said generations of Mayo people have lived and died and not seen what we're seeing. It's very, even for me, with no Mayo connections in that respect,
Yeah.
it's very powerful. And then we heard in some of the footage the Johnny Cash song Redemption Day on RTE.
I've wept for those who suffer long, but how I weep for those who've gone. Oh, what mercy sadness brings, if God be willing. There is a train that's heading straight to heaven's gate, to heaven's gate. And on the way, child and man and woman wait, watch and wait for Redemption Day.
And this theme of redemption kept coming through. For me, it might sound pretty grandiose, but I genuinely think in some ways that we're seeing Christ's redemptive work in the world in a manner that these little pieces are partaking in that in some way and pointing us to that greater work of redemption. I wonder if you might speak to that, maybe that element of redemption in sport and indeed in wider life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think of, the idea that all the great myths are somehow pointing towards the kind of the great myth, the true myth of Christianity. And you felt when you were watching this match, you were watching something almost mythic. You were participating in a real life myth. Something kind of epic and legendary kind of right there before you. And so, of course, then as a Christian watching this, you're going to see echoes and connections with the kind of the Paschal mystery and the life of the church. And so that's certainly the case there. And I mean, I'd say, when Marty Morrissey is talking about all those generations and so on, that was a big part of the emotion for people, is that it was so long and so many people were waiting for so long to see this happen and turning up in hope again and again and again. And so for a lot of people, when they were weeping, they were remembering those people who had first brought them to matches and so on. And again, that powerful intergenerational connection is something that's right at the heart of the Catholic faith. That it's not just me on my own in worship, but that I'm here with kind of generations and generations before me worshiping the true God. So that in itself is a powerful connection with the Christian faith, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Amen. And you and I send each other voice notes and WhatsApp messages and so on. And one of those that you sent me was about how the Mayo team embody a healthy masculinity, which I thought was really good, really interesting. And I was watching closely how young men like Kobe McDonald, even 18 years old, were engaging with the children and the fans.
Oh, yeah.
And were so respectful, so attentive. And I think what you said is true. And there has been a lot of debate about this toxic masculinity and so on, and with a lot of that rhetoric arriving in Ireland via the US and so on.
Yeah.
But what are some of the features of that healthy masculinity that you saw and that maybe has particularly encouraged you with this Mayo team?
Yeah, I suppose it was partly in contrast with what we saw at the World Cup final, and in the wake of the World Cup final, some of the antics that were on display there, and the kind of the ill temper and all this kind of stuff that was at work there, and the kind of dishonesty and so on. Here in Mayo versus Kerry, you had just a game that was utterly honestly played. Everybody just like pouring themselves. So Dara Byrne said, I think in his interview afterwards, he's only 19, but he said, we went out there and we said, we're going to die out there. And we did die.
We said before the game we were going to die out there. And we did. We just took our chances down the stretch. And my heart was in my mouth the last 10 minutes there when Clifford kicked the one out the right. I thought we were dead and buried, but the character of this group is shown. No one gave us a chance in this game, but everyone in that dressing room believed. That's all that we need.
I mean, even there, you're right at the heart of the Christian, the idea that you need to die in order to rise again. And it's something that our manager, when I was growing up, even when we were like 13 years old, our manager, Sean Armstrong, who's since gone to the Lord, God rest him, he was always saying to us, die out there, die for the ball, die. And this willingness to kind of give of yourself completely. I think that's really at the heart of what we might call a healthy masculinity. And I'd say also, with that toxic masculinity, we think of things like, pride, manipulation of others, and so on. And these men on the team, insofar as we can tell, and based on kind of listening to interviews and so on, there's a genuine humility there, a kind of, a good amount of self-control, which is necessary in any athletic endeavor and team athletic endeavor, and generosity as well. I mean, one thing they're constantly saying is that this is about everyone who's gone before them. So kind of a man who's able to stand up after having done something that, everybody, that causes so much emotion, so much excitement, and to say, this is, based on everything that went before us, every other manager, every other player, every fan, all the people of Mayo. I just think there's something again, if you're thinking about what it means to be a healthy man in society, that is an important part of it. That it's not about me as a self-made man standing on my own 2 feet, kind of getting the squarest jaw possible, and all this kind of stuff, and taking peptides. But no, it's about recognizing that I'm part of something bigger, and I'm dependent on all of that, and I'm going to like pour myself into that project, but recognizing that it's bigger than me, and there's effort that precedes my own effort. And just I can sum that up in one little phrase. So the Mayo team has been going on a kind of a pilgrimage around Mayo, and again, this brings us to the theme of localism, which we might return to. That these players who play for the county, they also play for their clubs, which is at a much smaller level, at the parish level. But it's very important that they're going with this trophy to all of these different clubs and parishes, and they're getting huge crowds in all of these places. And it's a way for them each to recognize their own at the smallest local level. And this is the place that made me. And Kobe McDonald, who's this kind of wunderkind, kind of extraordinary star, he was in Crossmolina, and he was addressing the people in Crossmolina, which is his parish, his team, his club. And he said something which would sound kind of grandiose coming from anybody else. But in the current moment, I think he's allowed to refer to himself in the third person. So he said, without Crossmolina, there's no Kobe McDonald.
So for me to be able to come home to my hometown, the place I love so much, with Sam Maguire, it's the best day of my entire life. And without all of you, without Crossmolina, there'd be no Kobe McDonald. And yeah, thank you.
And I just think that's, again, as I said, it could sound grandiose, but actually it's a wonderful act of humility and recognizing you are the people who made me. And again, there's something really like wise about that, and true, and a kind of a truth that's maybe been forgotten.
No, absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you, Father Connor. And I love the way they welcomed the likes of Lee Keegan, who of course went to the top of the mountain so many times almost, and just failed at the last. And literally Pádraig O'Hora, who went and climbed Mount Everest, that they brought him to the fold. That's wonderful. And so you and I have a joint interest in many ways, I think, in symbolism and Jonathan Pajot's symbolic world. So I want to talk a little bit about the symbolic world of the GAA, so to speak. So I suppose why not look at some of the symbolism around the Mayo team and the GAA then. So one of the things that I've been enjoying recently, it maybe in light in some ways of this recent All-Ireland, is looking at the symbolism of the GAA crests. And I think the more that you dig into them, the more you realize that they're not just sporting logos. They really do preserve different bits of history and identity. They show the landscape of Ireland oftentimes, and are distinctly Christian heritage as well. And that's no more so the case than with the Mayo crest. So we want to come to that, but I want to also look even at the Mayo colours as well. So nowadays everyone knows the green and red of Mayo, and you'll have heard that with the saw doctors blaring out in Croke Park and so on. But many of us maybe haven't even asked about where those colours came from. So I discovered the old Mayo motto wasn't simply green and red, it was the green above the red. And that's not just the colours on the jersey. It refers to this fascinating history from the 19th century with Thomas Davis's patriotic poem, The Green Above the Red. And in that poem, green represents Ireland, of course, and red represents England.
Our neighbours.
So the idea then was that the green should be above the red. And in the 1800s and so on, you had around Ballintubber, some of these places, this phrase then, which was adopted as the local football motto. And you would have had the green flying above the red with the flags around the field. So as the GAA grew then in Mayo, and the team became more prominent, that those colours became the colours of the county. So even before you get to the crest itself, of course, you have this wonderful story that just a simple look at the symbolism of the colours would open the door to this fascinating history.
I had no idea of that until you sent those notes, and you can see why maybe they kind of don't promote that story in a kind of a post-sectarian context. But I had no idea that it was true. But actually, I was reading a letter that I'll come back to in a while, maybe, Archbishop Croke's letter accepting to become the first patron of the GAA in 1884. And he says he's kind of criticizing people who who adopt all of England's customs, and they play tennis and all this kind of stuff, and all this kind of effeminate, what he calls effeminate and dandyism and all this, rather than playing local Irish games. And he says those people are the people who want England's bloody red above the green. So there you go. That's another little echo of that colour scheme.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Father Connor. So the first thing then about the crest that caught my eye was the large double cross in the middle, so with a patriarchal cross surrounded by the different three smaller crosses. So from what I've been reading, they represent the historic diocese connected with Mayo. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that. I just thought that was fascinating that one of our most recognizable sporting crests has those Christian symbols just sitting right there at the heart of it, for starters.
Tuam is the important one. And those dioceses are established in the 12th century. So there were always bishops in Ireland, but you didn't always have really clear kind of diocesan boundaries. And with the church reforms in the 12th century, you have kind of developing structures of dioceses. So that's where those dioceses kind of have their origin, all the way back then. But initially, Tuam wasn't an archdiocese. And the O'Connors, who were a rising power, they were kind of rising royal power, they were determined that they should have an archbishop in their territory and not just bishops. And that's how Tuam became an archdiocese as well. Tuam, incidentally, has the coolest symbol of any of the dioceses. Its symbol is a broken wheel, which I just think is so cool. And it's because Jarlath went on his little cart and he was instructed by the Lord to keep going until the wheel broke. And there he'd found his monastery. And so St. Jarlath founded the monastery of Tuam, where the wheel broke. And I just think there's a lot of powerful symbolism in that in itself.
So around then the crest, around the edge, you have 9 yew trees.
Yeah.
So Mayo, is that the Gaelic
Mayo, yeah.
Mayo, the plain of the yew trees. So the trees represent the county's Irish name then, of course, and they also stand for the 9 historic baronies, if again Google is to be believed.
That's
It
right.
also made me think about how often you see yew trees beside Ireland's older churches. Is there a deeper significance to the yew tree in Ireland, for example? It's worth exploring.
Yeah, I've heard that there is. I mean, it's hard to know for sure how far back it goes. But they're definitely like very often associated with graveyards. That goes way back. The actual place Mayo, there was an abbey in Mayo, which was founded, actually St. Bede the Venerable already talks about this, where there were English monks who refused to accept the Synod of Whitby and the kind of the pro-Roman ruling of the Synod of Whitby. They went with St. Colman, went all the way to Inishbofin, off the west of Ireland, off Galway and Mayo. But there they couldn't agree with the Irish monks about how to run the monastery. So these English monks were given a new monastery in a place called Mayo Abbey, which eventually got the name Mayo of the Saxons. So you had a monastery of Englishmen, like St. Gerald of Mayo is an Englishman. And this is all the way back, I think, in the early 8th century. So yeah, you have a very interesting story there for the origin of the name Mayo, which eventually gave its name to the whole county.
Excellent. And then you have the little ship on the bottom. Officially, from what I read, it represents the maritime history, of course, which makes sense. You think about Clew Bay, some of these places, Ecklow, Killala, and so on. You have that lovely Atlantic coastline. But I also wonder, does it speak to other pieces? Like we know from history and a lot of the work that you've done with Treasure Island, for example, that monks would have traveled oftentimes by seeing those great myths associated with that.
Yeah.
Pilgrims arriving from other shores, missionaries leaving, and so on. And then later, the generations emigrating across the Atlantic while often carrying the faith with them. Does the sea have a particular place in Mayo's Christian history in that respect that's worth referring to?
Yeah, I mean, I think all up the west coast, you've got holy islands, islands that were chosen by monks as places for kind of solitude and living out the monastic life. And Mayo is no different from the others in that there are some islands like that. Inishglora is probably the most famous one, which is sometimes associated with the voyages of St. Brendan. So there's definitely maritime connections that are kind of resonant with the faith there as well.
Mm-hmm. And then also on the crest you have the hills, the most significant being with the little church on top, which refers to Kilpatrick, of course.
Yeah.
And whenever we think of Mayo, oftentimes our minds are drawn to Patrick, that it's one of the great pilgrimage sites in the whole of Ireland and the world in some ways. And for centuries, people have climbed the Reek in memory of St. Patrick and his days of prayer and fasting and so
Yes.
on. For someone maybe who's only heard of Reek Sunday, maybe they see it in the news, all these
Mm.
pilgrims going up the mountain. Why has Patrick remained such an important place in Irish Christian life for so long?
Well, I think for anybody who's seen Patrick, that mountain also known as the Reek, who's seen it in the flesh, and you can see it from so many different parts of Mayo, you won't be surprised to that it's been regarded as a holy place. I mean, it's just like this beautiful, perfect cone from certain angles. It just looks like a holy mountain, ought to look. And it seems that there was, even before Christianity arrived, that there was some kind of religious practices associated with that mountain. Before Patrick again is said to have prayed there. And it's been a site of pilgrimage. I mean, I think going back into maybe the 11th century is the first reference to pilgrims on the mountain. But even before that, there are archaeological remains of a church at the top. So been a really, really long-standing place of pilgrimage. It's not an easy mountain to climb. It's been made a little easier by steps up at the top now. It's kind of preserves the structure of the mountain up there at the top. But it's definitely well worth the climb. I mean, every time I go up, I tell myself, it'll be easier this time, and it's always harder than it was the last time. So it's a magnificent mountain to climb, and it's a place where you can feel close to St. Patrick, I think, as well, given that he was so associated with these wild places in the west of Ireland, in his own apostolic endeavours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Father Connor. And myself and my uncles will be climbing it now next month, actually.
Best of luck.
God willing.
Bring a stick.
So I actually struggled so much the first time, and in my mind, going again, I just said, "Oh, this is going to be absolutely horrific." And it actually was much better the second time once I had.
Oh, good. Glad to hear it.
So, advice for anyone who's interested: expect the worst, and then it'll
Yeah,
be a wee bit
that's
better.
a wise approach.
So everyone knows Patrick, but they don't always know Ballintubber Abbey, which is also very significant in some of these respects. So I only really discovered that it's often referred to as the abbey that refused to die, and
Yeah.
founded in the 1200s. It continued as a place of Christian worship even through the penal era, and it remains in use today. And I spoke to some of the folks there a few months ago, and they seem to be doing wonderful work. I wonder if you
Yeah.
could tell us a little bit about Ballintubber Abbey and its significance then.
It's funny. I'm looking out here on Galway Bay, and I just saw a whole family walking past in Mayo jerseys. Everybody who has any connection with Mayo at the moment is wearing their Mayo jersey day in and day out. It's kind of going too far at this stage, but I love it. Ballintubber Abbey, yeah, it's a really wonderful place. I've done a good few weddings there, and actually just about a week before the All Ireland final, the man who did most to kind of renovate the place in recent times, Father Frank Fahey, he went to his reward. So I'm sure he was interceding for the team as well. But Ballintubber Abbey, it's one of these many houses of Augustinian canons that were founded in the 12th century in association with pilgrimage sites, as places where pilgrims could go and be welcomed, have a rest, be looked after. And it seems there was a lot of kind of banditry associated with these pilgrimages. So the O'Connor kings, they clamped down really hard on banditry. They want to promote the pilgrimage. They established this monastery in Ballintubber as kind of, I suppose, a place of safety and sanctuary and hospitality. And it's well worth going to. And there's a kind of a medieval path that you can walk on from Ballintubber to Croagh Patrick itself.
Excellent. Thank you, Father Connor. And so this little segue into the symbolism of the county crest of Mayo, I think, is really whetting my appetite for doing something with other county crests, because they do open us up to all this fascinating history, and I think it's a wonderful way for folks to engage with some of the riches of the GAA, with Irish history or Christian faith and the former pagan heritage and so on. So if anyone is interested, let me know in the comments if you would like to hear more of those. And I was looking at some of the crests this morning. Some of them would definitely lend themselves. Maybe we could even do the 32 counties of Ireland. But
Totally.
folks can let me know anyway. And we spoke in the past about that local element and the parish side of the GAA. Maybe you could begin by telling us a bit more about that and how that's been manifest in your own life, and how it does transcend sport in many ways.
Yeah. So I think, in our time, one of the big buzzwords is globalization and globalism.
Yeah.
And there are obviously, positive aspects to that in so many different ways. But people often kind of decry the loss of roots that can result from that. And so one question is, how can we kind of find our roots again, or kind of grow deep roots, or appreciate the roots we already have? And often, sometimes this can be associated with a certain kind of a nationalism, or even a kind of a race identity, which has kind of obviously problematic aspects from a Christian perspective. But in some ways, a healthier approach is to go more local, and to kind of go for really, really local roots, and simply to see, well, how do I belong to the place around me immediately? And I think the GAA, the way it's structured, in that it has these really small units, these clubs based on parish boundaries, which have nevertheless strong identities based on constant rivalry with all the local neighboring parishes. So you have an identity built up on kind of performance against all the rivals, but friendly performance against all these rivals usually. So you have this identity that's built up, and it's a way in which people can actually come to have solidarity with the people with whom they live. So again, one of the questions that people often ask is, well, how can integration happen? Like, let's say with recent immigrants into Ireland and so on. And one of the ways in which it is absolutely happening is through the GAA, because if people are arriving, even if they're arriving from Syria or Nigeria or wherever it might be, if they become committed to the local project, the local story, and do their best for the local team, often that's a really wonderful way to bind in with the local community that already exists, to kind of attach yourself to the deep roots that are there. So that's something that was coming up again and again with the Mayo victory. This major emphasis on what is local. Not just the first of all, because the players don't move around from team to team. For life, generally they play for the same club. Even if they live in Dublin, let's say, they'll still play for the same club and for the same county. And often, given the way Ireland's, in the 20th century, there hasn't been a huge amount of mobility. Often their fathers and grandfathers and great grandfathers will have played. The players in the Mayo team, in some cases, I think Dara Burns, was it his great grandfather was on the winning team in 1951, and Conor Loftus, his granduncle, I think, was on the team in 1951 as well, Dr. Mick Loftus. So just these kind of the roots that are already there, but they're open to the world around them, if you like. So in other words, it's possible for people to gain access to this local tradition through sport. I think that's such a healthy thing. And I think it's just the kind of thing that we're looking for in our time, where we're kind of threatened by globalism, looking for a way to kind of really build local communities, strong local communities, and sport, and especially the GAA, I think, do that to an extraordinary extent.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And is it fair to say that is in some ways a healthy alignment with Catholic social teaching, and this balance of subsidiarity and solidarity, for example?
I would say absolutely so. A heavy emphasis on the local, the idea that kind of small is beautiful, economically, politically, socially, that's the starting point of all our politics is the local. I think that absolutely chimes with Catholic social teaching. Yeah.
Excellent. And even going beyond the local, in a sense, there's a kind of there's an outreach element. They had the World Games down in Waterford there a few weeks ago. I don't know if you saw it, the lads from Zambia that brought Zambian dancing and everything, and the jersey is fast too.
Absolutely. There's a classic photograph of a Columban missionary in China I think in the 1930s or something, and you have all these real serious Chinese lads with hurls. It's the hurling team in Shanghai or something like that. So yeah, there's a certain amount of kind of bringing the games to the world. But I think broadly speaking, we can say that Gaelic athletic games, the Gaelic games, haven't really been a success beyond Ireland. I think we can broadly accept that fact, and I think that is part of their importance locally. So I kind of cringe slightly when people, there's always articles saying, oh, here's somebody in Britain who's discovering hurling for the first time. Let's look at how they tweeted about it. Let's look at their reaction to our game. That to me is what Patrick Kavanagh calls the provincial attitude. And he says the provincial man wants to know what people in the metropolis think of what he's doing and thinking and saying. But he says the parochial man is in no doubt about the validity of his parish. And I really like that. And he says the parochial is the way to the universal because it deals with what is fundamental. So I think there's something about that in the GAA at its best, that these battles, they might not have a global audience. Okay, sometimes they do to some extent, but whether they do or not, the local battle kind of has its own importance. And people have confidence in the fact that this is important. What is happening locally between this parish and that parish, or between this county and that county, has its own importance. And we might think of the poem by Patrick Kavanagh, Epic, one you're familiar with, I'm sure, where the poet is kind of observing these people having a dispute over land. And he's kind of saying, what's this all about? There's something happening in Munich that seems far more important, which is kind of 1938, the Munich Agreement and so on. And Homer, the poet Homer, appears to him and he says, I made the Iliad of such a local row. Gods make their own importance, or something like that. Isn't that what it says?
Yeah.
Gods make their own importance. So I really find that there in the GAA, that spirit of just confidence in the local battle and local community and local excellence as having its own validity. And we don't need to be looking for approval to the outside world. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Amen. No, absolutely. I do have that concern oftentimes that Irish people can be caught in ressentiment, to use the kind of Nietzschean term, and maybe we judge ourselves inordinately against the British. I know I said kind of in jest about the green above the red, but you can't constantly be droning back to the British did this, this, and this.
Yeah.
I'm still going to be a perpetual victim. And like that too, we should be, if we're bringing folks in, we should be confident and willing and open to share these wonderful gifts that we have, unique.
Exactly. I think exactly that. You're absolutely right. If you're confident in what we're doing locally, then we won't be threatened by let's say new arrivals, and we'll say to them, come take part in what we're doing locally. It's when we're most anxious about what is local and most worried about what is local that we're then especially threatened by the arrival of a stranger, let's say. Now, of course, there's all kinds of questions to be had, all questions to be debated about the extent of immigration, and that's not what I'm kind of referring to here. But just again, that low confidence in what is local and in the excellence of what is local, which can nevertheless be really open to global arrivals. I'd say that the very foundation of the GAA involves an attempt to reject a provincial attitude. So right from the start, the choice to value Gaelic games and local sports, and initially went far beyond hurling and Gaelic football, included all these other sports like, Archbishop Croke refers to games like leapfrog and tip the hat and kind of wrestling, and he calls it football kicking in the Irish style or something like that. So Archbishop Croke's letter, he understands the GAA in 1884 to be about a rejection of a trend which he sees, and that trend is for the Irish to adopt everything that is English mannerisms, English dress, English sport, English vicious literature from England, as he calls it. And instead he sees it's for us to return to what we have, to value what we have, not to be embarrassed by it, to value it and to promote it and to share it and so on, and to codify it and to make competitions out of it and so on. So there is that kind of rejection of a provincial attitude and the promotion of what we might call a parochial attitude. It's funny, even in 1884, he says, we have forgotten what we're about. So in the late 19th century, saying we don't have bonfire night anymore. We don't have snap apple night anymore. There's this nostalgia for things. And I mean, I said that to my dad, and he said, but we did have snap apple night in like the 1950s. But in the 1880s, they were worried about these things, dying out and being replaced by whatever was coming in from England. So I think there's all kinds of trends like that today, a desire to return to kind of local folk traditions. Sometimes those desires have a Christian complexion. Other times it's more kind of a post-Christian, pagan complexion or whatever. But I think they're all aspects of the same phenomenon, this desire to reclaim what is kind of indigenous or of kind of, has deep roots here.
Excellent. Thanks, Father Conor. And we might look then at that structure of the GAA even as a 32 county structure. And sorry if I refer to GAA when you're right to refer to Gaelic Games. The organisation can't be synonymous with the games, which are more cognitive in some ways. And shout out to the handball folks.
Yes, and rounders. Don't forget rounders.
So I find a great encouragement in the association, like the church, continuing to organise itself primarily around the historic counties of Ireland rather than the political border. And it reminds us, I think, in some ways that the nation simply cannot be reduced to the state, and the games are for everyone on the island. And it's not even just for Catholics, it's open to people from different Christian traditions. And as you say, new folks coming in who aren't even Christian. So I think one figure who speaks to that in a way is Sam Maguire. I wonder if you might speak a bit about Sam Maguire, then we'll know from the cup.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Sam Maguire is kind of one of those characters who kind of bursts out of the usual categories we have for thinking about Irish history, because he was a member of the Church of Ireland, Protestant, and yet a very fierce Irish Republican in London in the kind of the 1910s, I think. And he was so fiercely Republican that even when he left the British Civil Service, came back to join the Irish Civil Service in the Free State, he was so strongly anti-treaty that he kind of lost his job. And he ended up dying a poor man in West Cork. And the year after he died, the Sam Maguire Cup was inaugurated in his honour for the All Ireland champions in GAA. But he was involved in Gaelic Games in London, where there's so already even back then there was this diaspora element which was very strong and is still present. London still have a team, which always seemed like a really strange anomaly to me. But I was kind of surprised to find even back then. They had a team. So yeah, it's Gaelic Games is often associated with Catholicism, and I think maybe there's been this drift in the kind of the middle of the 20th century, this kind of reducing of Irishness and Catholicism, and then your choice of sport, that they're all the one thing. And I would kind of regret that. I think that's kind of unfortunate. It excludes other kind of narratives and threads and so on in the story. But there are those threads. They really do exist. And I was reading recently, Paul Rouse, I'd recommend anybody who's interested in the history of Irish sport, just read everything Paul Rouse has written, and his podcasts and all that kind of stuff. Excellent. And he really goes into the nuances of Irish identity, religious identity, and sporting kind of choices and practices, that they're a lot more complex than we might have imagined just looking at the mid 20th century, where they're all kind of merged into one. So in that, mid 20th century, before All Ireland finals, they're singing Faith of Our Fathers, which is very much a Catholic song. It's the Archbishop of Cashel who's like throwing the ball in to start the game. The Archbishop of Cashel, who's the successor of Dr. Croke, is still the patron of the GAA. But at those times, I think even there was one match, and before the game started, everyone knelt down and prayed a decade of the Rosary together. And I love people praying the Rosary, don't get me wrong. But these things were a bit too tightly connected in that at that point in Ireland's history.
Oh, thank you. And as you taught me, the cup itself, the Sam Maguire Cup, was modelled on the beautiful Ardagh chalice, which again seems to point back to that Ireland's Christian heritage. I wonder if you might tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. So the Ardagh chalice, it's one of those objects that was discovered in the 19th century, like the Tara brooch. These beautiful kind of objects of extraordinary metalwork, which kind of partly inspired a new sense of national identity. I mean, or they kind of, helped that sense of national identity to grow and to be strengthened. Because we were reminded as Irish people that we did beautiful, amazing things in the past. We're not this like underclass or this kind of, subhuman group of people, the mere Irish who need to be governed by our neighbours in order to do anything. Here's something from our deep past, which is technically, very, very impressive. So the Ardagh chalice, this kind of 8th or 9th century chalice, which is made up of, several dozen different pieces of metal. Absolutely extraordinary to see. I'd recommend anyone to, if you're in Dublin, go to the National Museum of Ireland. It's free, and you can see the Ardagh chalice and also the Derry na Flan chalice and the Derry na Flan paten and so on. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really, really interesting thing that they chose a chalice kind of on which to model the cup that's raised in victory. So from 1928, that's what's been kind of lifted by the winning team. I actually preached about that. I mean, I had to preach about it the day after Mayo won. Just the fact that when a team wins, it's not just the team who celebrate, but all of those who participate in their victory, all of their fans and followers, and all of those who support them, they share in the victory of the team. And in the same way, raising the chalice at Mass, it's the kind of the victory of Christ that's represented, but it's not his victory alone. It's a victory in which all of us share. So maybe that's a little bit cheesy. I don't know. I've been doing a lot of that recently over the last few days, finding connections. But I think that's a particularly resonant one, just because they're lifting this chalice, they're kissing it, they're passing it around, everyone touches it. And there's even some suggestion, I'm trying to remember where I saw this, some suggestion that the shape of the Ardagh chalice is possibly an imitation of what St. Adavnon reports as the Holy Grail in Jerusalem. So he meets a pilgrim returned from Jerusalem who refers to this Holy Grail and describes how big it is. And it's possible that chalices at the time in Ireland were therefore modelled on that description. And so what these people are actually lifting is the Holy Grail, kind of a version of the Holy Grail, which is all the more significant.
Class, all the Martin Shaw, Peugeot.
Exactly. Exactly.
So a few times now, what you've described speaks to the frame that I have in my mind oftentimes about these things in relationship to the church and the GAA, to what extent it can be iconic in the best sense, an icon, the true Christian life, but also where does it risk becoming an idol? See that with what you described with maybe if it's done in a certain way, it might feel exclusionary to other Christians or what have you. And we also maybe see it even simply logistically in the sense that oftentimes Mass nowadays clash with Gaelic football training and what have you. And I know there's only one winner, it seems, in modern Ireland. The GAA is taking over. A lot of the kids are going to their cool camps and different things. So how might we get that balance today between the church and the Gaelic games so it can be properly iconic and not slip into that place of idolatry maybe?
Yeah, so again, there from a Christian perspective, all of these human activities which are healthy, every human activity which is healthy can become unhealthy if it's carried out in the wrong way, or kind of to too great an extent, or placed above the love of God. So there's a proper ordering of these things. And sport, like any other human activity, can become an idol, taking the place of God. That's certainly the case. I know a lot of young men who do this program called Exodus 90, which is a kind of an ascetical program where they, it's cold showers for 90 days. And one of the things they have to give up is watching sport. They will watch, maybe like they're allowed to watch one match a week or something like that. They have to exercise more, but watch less sport. And for some of them, that's really, really difficult, is to let go of that idol from their lives. So there can be an element of idolatry, and at the same time, I would absolutely recognize that kind of sport, the playing of sport, supporting a team, playing it yourself, playing a game yourself, all of these things can be really, really good preparation. First of all, they can just really grow virtue. Just at the merely human level, just ordinary human virtues, you gain them by the practice to use Alistair McIntyre's term, that practice of Gaelic games in this case, it cultivates certain virtues. In order to be a good Gaelic football player, you need to have certain virtues, and therefore playing the game and playing it to a high level, you cultivate certain habits in yourself, certain good practices, good habits I should say, which we call virtues. So that's a good preparation. That experience of transcendence, of togetherness, of sacrifice, of patience, all of these things can be beautiful preparations and open us up to the work of God in our lives in different ways. But as I said, they can also take the place, or they can close us off to God if we make an idol of the team, of victory, or even just an idol of the activity itself. That this is what my life is all about. All my life is about is playing sport. That's definitely an issue. Or if my whole life is centered on a particular team, that's obviously a problem. I think we'd all recognize that. And this is something that right from the beginning of the GA, this was a concern. So this is, again, something that surprised me. And I learned this thanks to Paul Rouse, but I actually looked up some of the original sources myself. And it's fascinating that right already in the 1880s, you have a disagreement between certain bishops about whether games should be played on a Sunday. And they're not strict Presbyterians who are saying we can have nothing like that on a Sunday. They're not against that in principle. It's that they think that this will take away from the Mass. So Archbishop Croke, he writes a letter convincing people, absolutely not, no self-respecting Gaelic, Gaelic athlete would miss Mass. And so matches are played on Sunday afternoon, and the idea is that you'd have time to go to Mass on Sunday morning. And that idea of like matching up Mass and match, they went very, very strongly together for a very long time. I remember when I do have an All-Ireland medal, but under 14. We won the All-Ireland under 14. And when we were at that competition in County Clare, the whole team went to Mass together. Now, that day, I would say, is gone. But it was present there for many, many decades. I was reading about one Kilkenny hurler in the 1970s who was being interviewed shortly after they won. But he was kind of dressing himself and the journalist said, why are you getting dressed so quickly? And he says, I have to go to Mass. I missed Mass this morning and I have to get to Mass. And he had just won the All-Ireland. Mm-hmm. So I think that, let's say, from a Christian perspective, that proper ordering of worship relative to sport, that's perhaps been lost because the importance of worship has been lost. And when I talk to priests all around the country, when I'm going on different parish missions, very often they will say something like, when I ask them about the local GA club, they'll be appreciative of what they're doing and all that kind of stuff, but they'll say that's our main competition. And we've tried to get them to change the times of training, the times of matches, so that it doesn't clash, that families are able to come, but they just won't do it. So there's a real, in rural Ireland, I would say there's a real problem at that level. Even though in many cases it was the local priest in the past who led the fundraising to build the pitch, to build the clubhouse. A lot of these clubs are named after the local priest. Diocesan colleges produced lots of, priests who were football lovers and who went on to promote the sport wherever they were posted. And yet that kind of long-standing relationship seems to be breaking down a bit. What to do about that? I'm not so sure, but I was speaking to a group of men in Tuam, and they were just wondering, like, what can we do as men in the faith? And they were thinking about kind of, should we go out and, kneeling, saying the rosary on the street, like these big public manifestations of faith. And I was encouraging them to think differently and said, how about, like, how many of you are involved in your local GA clubs? Why not all of you get involved? And without turning them into something that's confessionally Catholic, nevertheless, your faith is going to play into the life of that sporting club in a way that'll be really important for the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, please God. And it would be wonderful if you talked about the cultivation of virtues, and before we started recording, we spoke about the importance of eating right and exercising and so on, and having that integrated view of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And yes, go and get physically fit and so on, but also you can be mentors towards those young men and women.
Totally.
But also you could be spiritual mentors of a kind with what you're describing. And I've in the past I've tried to encourage some inter-county players maybe to go on retreat together even,
Yep.
because they are models at that physical level. Maybe if some of the young folks could see that they're serious about their faith, then I guess that's slightly different from what you're
Yeah.
describing, because I'm going back to the public
Yeah.
display of what it means to be a Christian in a sense, which
But that's
obviously has,
significant too, I think.
but yeah, hopefully something like that and what you're describing could serve young folks well. There,
Absolutely.
there's an element, Father Connor, of work and prayer that obviously was key to the life of the monks, but there is maybe an understated element in some places, in some cases, of play.
Yeah.
Not of course, with your beloved St. Thomas Aquinas, for
Yes.
example. And there are a number of figures I've been deeply struck by. The late Dr. Kevin Vost, who was very much into St. Thomas Aquinas. He wrote about health and fitness and some of those things from a distinctly Christian perspective. I've read other folks on play, this theology of sport, Jeremy Treat, Lincoln Harvey, some of these folks. Joseph Pieper wrote about leisure in a very comprehensive
Hmm.
sense. Father James Shaw wrote after him. I want to speak a little bit about that, and maybe you could share a bit from Aquinas about play and the kind of joy that sports brings, even beyond those physical benefits and so on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's such an important idea. The idea of recreation, play, pointless activity, you could say, activity that doesn't have any economic purpose. I think one of the problems in our time is that we're constantly feeling like we're cogs in an economic wheel, in corporate wheels, especially when we're just constantly on our phones, because we're aware at some level that this is not play, that I'm working for a big corporation and they're colonizing my inner life. And we're aware that that's happening, and I'm not really recreating. But when we choose to actually play a game, whether that's, playing cards, or going for a walk, that, not walking to a point in order to do something, but just going for a walk, or playing a game of football with friends, or playing board games or whatever it might be. In all of those cases, we're doing something that is not economically necessary and yet is deeply human. And it's a way of honoring the way we're made, giving ourselves rest, and it's a way of honoring our own dignity. So it's funny, it's a kind of curious thing. Becoming more childlike and playing a game is actually a way to recognize our own dignity and to honor that dignity. So I'd say in societies that have very little play, where people just kind of work, those people probably feel less of a sense of their dignity than maybe in another society, which might be poorer, for example, but where there's a strong element of communal play. So I think that's a major part of our flourishing is play. St. Thomas Aquinas writes about this at length. The virtue, he calls it eutrapelia, that's the Greek term for the virtue of someone who's able to play a game. And he thinks it's a moral problem if somebody is so serious that they're not able to play a game. And he thinks it's a morally good thing to play a game. He says, especially when we're tired. He says the body gets tired and we give it rest. The soul gets tired. We're not able to focus on, in this life, to focus on serious things all the time. And so we need to give our souls rest. And he says the soul's rest is pleasure. And we find pleasure in play. He doesn't give too many examples of the kind of thing he's imagining, but we can kind of fill in the gaps. So I think that's a really important thing, that, when we see children are playing less and, let's say, on their phones more. I know it's such an obvious thing to complain about, but ourselves too, adults, when we're playing less and maybe on our phones more, just this constant sense of being busy, our dignity is not being recognized. We're not living in a way that acknowledges our own dignity. Whereas when we lie back in the heather, or go for a walk, or just sit by the sea, or play a game, we're actually living like kings. Whether we're rich or poor, we have the capacity to have those kind of kingly moments. You think of the Abraham Heschel, who wrote a beautiful book on the Sabbath, and he says, whether a Jew is rich or poor, on the Sabbath is like a palace in time, and he inhabits that. The king and his queen, they inhabit this palace in time, and it'll pass, but for that day, they're in a palace, whether they're rich or poor. And I think play is a little bit like that for us. There's this kind of possibility to kind of just escape. And it's not just to escape, but to kind of move beyond our economic limits and whatever else might be, and just enter into another sphere for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is, I think you and I have spoken in the past about this on different occasions, and I've drawn on about this oftentimes now, but there is an element of this kind of hermeneutic of suspicion that tries to reduce everything to economic interests,
Yes.
so on and so forth. And you see that kind of sneering about the GAA too sometimes. Ostensibly, it is an amateur organization, but then you've got these sponsorship deals and so on. So some folks are maybe salty about that and the way where the money's going and so on. And sometimes that's fair enough. But I want to just say, in light of with what you're describing, at its heart, in some ways, and the best of the GA or the best of Gaelic games, more comprehensively, is this element of play and that element beyond the utilitarian. We're not just doing it for money, or we're not just doing it for power or status or what have you. There is that, you see it, this love for the game that people at that very core parish level have, people at the intercounty level have. And I think it is a wonderful antidote whenever you focus your attention on that, to that constant overcooked hermeneutic of suspicion in some sense.
Yeah, that phrase, love of the game, I just think that's such a rich phrase, love of the game, versus other possible loves that might be involved in sport, especially professional sport, like love of money or whatever it might be. When you look at how, I mean, American sport, it kind of astonishes me, the money that's involved in it, and then the mercenary attitude of players who will just kind of go where the money is best. That's not the case in Gaelic games. As you say, there are some kind of, slippy areas where there might be kind of people earning money in different ways, that they're looked after well or whatever it might be. But the fact is that they're making huge, huge sacrifices for love of the game. And that love of the game is something that includes so many people, so many more people than them. It includes all of the people who are playing with them and all of the people who are watching and enjoying as well. So I think that's something, I don't want to over romanticize it. But I mean, I would be heartbroken if Gaelic games were ever professionalized, because that element would be completely lost. You see soccer players when they kind of move to a new club and they're like kissing the crest and all this kind of stuff. And you just know it's such an empty gesture at some level. Whereas when you see somebody like Ryan O'Donoghue, after I think he scored like a 2-pointer, and he turns around, he kisses the crest, and you're kind of getting the people going. That's something that's so pure and authentic. And I really love just being part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's Robbie Keane's boyhood club. Like every team that Robbie Keane went to was his boyhood
club. Brilliant. I love it. I love it. I've always supported these.
What you described, Father Conor, brought to my mind the wonderful movie Chariots of Fire, a bit of an oldie now, but there's a line that I want to just share for folks who maybe it might help them to get this. So he says, and this is kind of a Presbyterian Scottish guy, often associated with being very dour and not very playful. But he says, I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Even though that didn't come directly from Eric Liddell, it's part of the movie. I thought that was like a lovely little story to share. And I think it does speak to what many of us feel about sports and that joy that we're describing and that love for the game that you mentioned.
I've decided. I'm going back to China. The missionary service have accepted me.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
But I've got a lot of running to do first. Jenny, you've got to understand. I believe that God made me for a purpose. For China. But He also made me fast. And when I run, I feel His pleasure. To give it up would be to hold Him in contempt.
Thank you so much for your time today, Father Conor. Just before we go, do you have any closing thoughts? Maybe you want to tell us where folks can follow you in your work?
Yeah, well, my main thought is Mayo for Sam 2027. Well, no, Galway. I always have to support Galway before I support Mayo. But when Galway are out, I'll support Mayo then. No, I mean, I'd encourage people who haven't, who have no idea what we're talking about. If they've got to this stage in the podcast and they've no idea whatsoever what we're talking about, I'd encourage them to go on social media, go on YouTube, and just look up clips of the game and the commentary and the homecoming and so on, and you'll get a sense of what it means to people, and I think a sense of the beauty of this thing. That there's something pure and wholesome, truly wholesome and sincere about this thing, which ought to be celebrated and recognized for what it is. Apart from that, I don't know, keep watching More Christ, keep watching Marcus's channel, and more recently, people might be interested. I did a little podcast, 2 episodes with Niamh Wycherley, who's teaches in Maynooth, and she has a podcast called the Medieval Irish History Podcast, and I did an episode on the religious orders in Ireland, religious reform in Ireland, and then a second episode on the friars in Ireland. So people might like to check that out, the Medieval Irish History Podcast. And yeah, pray for Dominican vocations, and know that the Dominicans are praying for all of you as well.
Mm-hmm. And Treasure Ireland, I'll add Treasure Ireland for
yes.
if you haven't caught it yet.
For Ballintubber, if you want to know more about Ballintubber Abbey especially, we did a whole series on County Mayo, but of what we talked about today, the Ballintubber Abbey one is probably the most significant.
Wonderful. God bless you in your ministry, Father Conor.
Thanks, Marcus.
I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. Ooh, I'm going there. Don't you want to go too? I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. I'm on my way. I'm going there. I'm going there. Nobody can stop me. Ooh, I'm going there. Don't you want to go too? I'm going there.
If you'd like to join us in the More Christ community, you can do so by becoming a patron over on Patreon, or you can support by becoming a member on YouTube. Either way, you'll get early access to new episodes, receive free ebooks each month, and are able to ask More Christ guests some of your burning questions. Thank you to my sponsor, Shea Blooms. Shea Blooms provides flower hire across Britain and Ireland.